The way you perceive me now traces back many years. The elderly woman settled into her rocker, facing her great-grandson and daughter. I'm aware you stumbled upon it while cleaning the attic. Perhaps it's time I shared its origin. In my youth, women adorned themselves in elaborate silk and satin gowns, adorned with bustles and lace. Europe was on the brink of war, with the Kaiser's escalating militarization. Then, tragedy struck with the assassination of the Duke, plunging Europe into chaos. Eager to serve, I enlisted immediately, but due to my petite stature, I was directed to a unique camp. Uniforms were non-existent, creating an oddly informal atmosphere for an army base. That's where I encountered Major Katerina Wellenberg. At ease, soldier. Any notion why you're here? I shook my head, and she continued. According to your record, you were involved in theater, impressions if I recall correctly. Is that accurate? Yes, ma'am. You possess a skill that may prove useful soon, and you seem to fit the criteria. Follow me. With those words, she rose and exited through a door at the rear of the room. She exuded an imposing presence, standing at least 5 feet 10 inches tall. I was ushered into another room where a frail elderly woman sat behind a desk. She scrutinized me before speaking. He will suffice quite well. Get him dressed and back here by 11 tomorrow morning. Her voice matched her appearance, raspy and aged. The major led the way, and I found myself in what appeared to be a dressing room. I hear you're familiar with these garments. Put them on, then knock for my inspection. She handed me a bundle of unmistakably women's clothes. Having worn women's attire for stage skits numerous times before, I had no qualms about changing. Corset hooks adorned the walls, aiding me in cinching my waist tightly. The rest of the attire slipped on effortlessly, and when I finished dressing, I rapped on the door. My adeptness with makeup and lack of prominent facial hair worked in my favor. The wig and dress were fashioned in the latest style, complemented by a small hat tilted jauntily atop my head. Upon seeing me, she gasped and bowed. Taking my hand, she led me back to the general. He too rose as I entered. With my flawless gait, posture, and mannerisms, I was treated with reverence. Yes. She is perfect. Private, we're a specialized unit created by the government for infiltration purposes. We boast a diverse range of skills, with disguise being just one of them. After the Archduke's assassination, their government descended into chaos, and the remaining family members either fled or met their demise. The king's daughter was visiting at the time and has been captured to coerce the rest of the family back into the country. However, returning would mean certain death for them. The princess, aged 20, is accompanied only by her personal maid, Gretchen Schenkamper. Her son currently resides in New York and serves as our intermediary. He's agreed to relay our plan to her, rescuing the princess from captivity. There's a possibility of substituting her with someone else in the castle, and your striking resemblance to the princess makes you a prime candidate. Post-war, you'll be able to return home. The major stood beside General Remartin as he outlined the mission. The major emphasized the extensive preparation required for readiness, stressing that participation was voluntary. I had the freedom to decline. Should you accept, we'll provide top-notch assistance, attire, makeup, mannerisms, and language refinement. Your familiarity with the country will be crucial, and will enhance your linguistic abilities as well. Once in place, you'll operate independently. There was no hesitation. It was an opportunity of a lifetime. I'm in, I affirmed. I was escorted to a modest house on the base and introduced to Dame Edna Hapston, a relative of the royal family with intricate knowledge of the castle and its inhabitants. Armed sentries equipped with state-of-the-art personal machine guns patrolled the perimeter 24/7. Additionally, there was a peculiar but skilled individual named Horace, well-versed in makeup and wardrobe techniques, who would serve as my mentor during my transformation into the princess. Now then, let's get you dressed, shall we? Horace led the way to my room, which was very large. I understood that you had some skills at dressing as a woman, and as he looked at me, completely dressed, he said, your skills were understated. Why don't you get undressed and we shall see what, if any, improvements we can make. I was left alone in the room. I looked in all of the closets, dresser drawers, and so on. Clothes of the finest materials hung in the closet. Several wigs sat on stands in an anteroom. I went to the bath. They wanted my best, and I was going to give it to them. I had a bath, and used a razor to remove all traces of body hair. I had almost no body hair anyway, so it was merely a matter of minutes and I was done. My beard was very light and blonde, and after I shaved, my skin was as smooth as a young girl's. I was just 17 then, and weighed just 120 pounds. I went into the dressing area, pulled a pair of underpants out of the drawer and slipped them on. They were silk of course, and came almost to my knees. The corset was smaller than the one I had on earlier, but I slipped it around me and tightened the laces. I had to use the corset hooks on the wall to get it as tight as it needed to be, but I managed. The dress I selected had a bodice that was low cut and allowed the tops of the chest to be seen, so I used an old trick. The corset had pulled my chest together, and I used a stocking full of matting that I took from the seat of a chair. I pulled the matting apart, making it loose, and slipped the stocking into the corset under my own chest. It filled out the area, felt soft enough to be the real thing, and gave me the shape of an average 20-year-old girl. The slip was a heavy, white linen affair that went almost to the ground. The dress I had chosen was dark green. It had the built-in bustle in the style of the era, and long sleeves. I made sure that I could get it on since it looked awfully small, but it fit. I took it off and went to the makeup table. I used a cream-type foundation similar to grease paint but lighter. I had to mix a little white powder into it to make it match my skin tone. Using 2 fingers, I applied it to my face. I did not use a lot of it, and after I dashed powder on my face and dusted off the excess, my skin had a healthy glow without the heavy makeup look. I used a soft black pencil sharpened to a point to outline my eyes, and a small amount of blue powder to accent my eyelids. I was ready for the dress, and slipped it over my head. As I buttoned up the dress, the material snugged against me closely, the form-fitting bodice making my small chest stand out. I selected a wig that was quite long, and put it on. The image was almost complete. I used a small brush to outline my lips and a red lipstick to fill in. The perfume on the vanity was an appetizer, and I gave myself a few dashes on the wrists and neck. The shoes had to be buttoned up, and I used a button hook to secure them. The heels were only about 2 inch high, but they worked wonders for the total look. Before I had them on, the dress dragged on the ground. I opened the door to my room and walked out. Oh my God! Dame Hapston clapped her hands to her face. You are the spitting image of the Queen when she was your age. I turned to face Horace, and he was also stunned. I'm not sure I can show you anything. We sat in the parlor and I answered his questions. He wanted to know how I managed to have such a nice chest. I told him, and he went out of the room for a moment and returned with what was obviously a fake one. It was soft to the touch, and had a small rubber balloon inserted into it. It has a water-like gel in it that will warm to your body temperature. That way, if anyone touches you, it will feel real. He also had one that would do the same as my homemade one. It would hold my own chest up, and at the same time fill out the bra. You could use spirit gum to attach either of these to your body if you need to. You can clean them with plain soap and water. He handed them to me, and I knew that these would be perfect. Dame Hapston took my hand and asked me if I would like to have dinner in town. A chauffeured car arrived at the door, and we ventured into town to dine at Butcher's, renowned for its exceptional cuisine. Several soldiers passed our table in a steady stream, eager to engage in conversation with me, but clearly apprehensive. Suddenly, the general entered and spotted Dame Hapston, making his way to our table. Please, General, take a seat. Allow me to introduce Her Royal Highness, Anna von Sibutin, heir to the throne and bearer of the Royal Staff of Tyrolia. Splendid! Absolutely splendid. My dear, you inspire hope in an old man's heart. For the first time, I dare to believe this might succeed. Over dinner, he detailed the plan for my entry into the country and the castle. There's much for you to grasp, and time is of the essence. Turning to me, he inquired if I could accompany him to a reception at the White House the following Friday. Edna will ensure you're properly attired and accompany you. Please be prepared by 9 a.m. Friday morning. We'll take my private train. The remainder of dinner consisted mostly of light conversation, and the soldiers ceased their visits to our table once the general had arrived. On Friday morning, I affixed the new silicone forms Horace had provided using spirit gum. I dressed in a traveling frock with a coat, a wide-brimmed hat adorned with a veil, and gloves. Transported to the train for the 4-hour journey to the capital, I was assigned an adjoining room with Dame Edna. Our bond had grown strong, and in character, I grew less concerned about her seeing me in various states of undress. I relied on her assistance to tighten the corset laces after attaching the partial forms to my chest. The resulting cleavage surpassed even my homemade ones. Carefully applying makeup, I utilized every technique gleaned from my stage career. Opting for a brighter shade of blue powder for my eyes, I meticulously outlined both upper and lower lids with the black pencil. The dress, crafted from white satin with a brocade lace overlay, exuded elegance. Edna adorned me with a diamond necklace, its sparkle enhancing my allure. Heavy diamond pendant earrings complemented the necklace. My leather shoes, white and glossy, featured diamond shoe clips adorning the toes. Finally, I applied red lipstick in a cupid bow shape and added a touch of rouge to my cheeks, creating a perpetual blush. Dame Edna, radiant in a royal blue dress, presented a striking contrast with her ample bosom, yet she exuded regal grace. My hair, styled in a Gibson with wisps of tendrils framing my face, completed the ensemble. Dame Edna and I entered the reception hall, announced by the coursier. Dame Edna Hapston and Her Royal Highness Anna von Sibutin. Passing through the reception line, we exchanged pleasantries with heads of various government offices until we reached President Wilson. His warmth and charm were evident as he extended an invitation for us to join his table, an esteemed honor. "Mr. President, may I have the pleasure of a dance with your delightful guest?" he inquired. With his gracious approval, I accepted his hand, and we glided onto the dance floor. Smith Harrison, a colonel in the army, proved to be an exceptional dancer. As we twirled and spun to the music, an enchanting aura enveloped us. He stood at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, brown hair, and soft brown eyes, a visage often described as handsome. Returning to the table, the president invited him to join us, and naturally, he sat beside me. Around 10 o'clock, the president announced his departure but extended an invitation for the colonel and me to join him in his private offices in 30 minutes. "Your performance is truly outstanding. By direct order, I've promoted you to major," the general declared. "Colonel Harrison will accompany you on this mission. It's his duty to ensure your safety. As a descendant of another royal house, he has access to the real princess. He'll facilitate your exit from the country and position you to assume her role. You depart in 5 days." Exiting the office together, the colonel informed me, "I'll be at the base to collect you on Wednesday. We'll utilize the general's train to reach New York and a liner to Europe." With a bow and a kiss on my hand, he departed, leaving me in the company of Dame Edna. Returning to the base, the general praised me enthusiastically. Dame Edna and I packed for the journey, aware that it might mark our final farewell. Smith arrived in his car to fetch me, and the train to New York whisked us away. "I have our passports," he assured me. "For the journey, you'll be Mrs. Olivia Harrison. It's safer for us to travel as a married couple." During our voyage across the Atlantic, Smith and I grew closer. He hailed from a family decimated by the Kaiser's forces, their land seized and bestowed upon German loyalists. Each evening, we danced in the ballroom, clasped hands whenever possible, and maintained the facade of newlyweds. Over the ocean's expanse, my affection for him deepened, and I dreaded the thought of parting ways. Upon reaching Europe, we connected with individuals who could facilitate our entry into the country. Within a week, our journey commenced. Traveling by rail to Switzerland, then by carriage into Austria, our passports now identified us as Austrians. In Salzburg, we lodged at the Karenbahn Hotel, conveniently situated near the mayor's residence on the north side of the Salz River. Smith and I ensured our public presence, dining and sightseeing in the old section of town. We explored Mozart's residence, a weathered yellow house, and the Grand Cathedral at the west end of town. Eventually, we were escorted to a castle approximately 30 kilometers outside town. Despite its unsightly yellow hue, the inhabitants provided us with new identities and attire. I donned a blonde wig and assumed the guise of a servant, while Smith adopted the role of a valet. Crossing the border without incident, we ventured to the princess's residence. Armed with forged documents, we gained entry to the castle, encountering minimal scrutiny from the guards. We navigated our way to the inner sanctum, where I proceeded to the princess's chamber. Knocking gently, I entered to find her seated at a small table, engrossed in writing a letter. "Your Highness, I've come to facilitate your escape to freedom," I announced. After explaining the plan, she readily agreed. We exchanged garments, with her donning the blonde wig and my attire. Later that night, under the guise of a servant using my documents, she departed the castle. Smith escorted her into Austria and handed her over to an associate. Within days, he returned and resumed his role as valet to the new general residing there. Meanwhile, I assumed the identity of the princess. My hair grew swiftly, rendering the wigs unnecessary within 2 months. Despite the general's persistent advances, I rebuffed his attempts to seduce me. I encountered Smith daily, and as I inhabited the role of the princess, I began to recognize his sterling character. Somewhere along the way, I realized I had fallen in love with him. His unwavering devotion and genteel demeanor captivated me. Eventually, the Axis forces were defeated, and surrender followed. It was then that we received the devastating news. The princess and her escort, along with 289 others, perished when a German torpedo boat sank their vessel en route to safety. Smith and I faced an insurmountable dilemma. I had been mistaken for the princess, and governments had returned lands and assets rightfully belonging to her family. Each time I signed her name on documents, I perpetuated the illusion. To reveal my true identity as a United States government agent would unravel months of delicate negotiations, potentially reigniting conflict in Europe. I had no choice but to continue masquerading as the princess. Alone one evening, Smith and I discussed our predicament. In a bold move, he drew me close and kissed me. Initially tentative, the kiss soon ignited with fervor. Reciprocating his feelings, I realized our bond ran deep. We resolved to marry, a means to ensure my safety and leverage the power of my lineage to reclaim his lost estates. As fellow royalty, our union was celebrated on a grand scale. President Wilson graced the occasion, extending his congratulations without ever acknowledging his role in the original plan. As we were unable to conceive children of our own, we enlisted a third cousin into our confidence. She bore Smith 3 children, whom he and I raised together. This arrangement ensured that we had heirs with royal lineage, verifiable and secure. Over time, my children grew, married, and had families of their own. Sadly, my son Daniel perished in the second conflict, yet his descendants found refuge in Switzerland. That, my dear children, is the true narrative. For the past 75 years, I've cherished the fortune of having such a remarkable family. I implore you to keep this tale within the confines of this room, the old woman concluded. Her great-grandchildren regarded her with reverence, recalling the countless moments they spent in her presence, listening to her stories, seeking comfort in her embrace during illness. Both understood the solemnity of her request, vowing to safeguard her secret. Observing her final bow, the children witnessed the end of an era. At her funeral, attended by dignitaries from around the world, the President of the United States silently paid homage to a remarkable woman who had concealed her true identity. She was laid to rest beside her beloved Smith in the family plot.